Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing another really fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Antonio Tataranni, who is both Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President of Life Sciences at PepsiCo. As Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Tataranni oversees all aspects of the company's efforts to protect its global workforce, the products, communities, especially in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Additionally, he also leads PepsiCo's life science strategy and the R&D Fellows Program as executive sponsor. And after joining the company in 2018 as Senior Vice President of R&D, has been responsible for leading the development execution of the nutrition and biosciences strategy in support of the company's portfolio of transformation, their positive agenda. He also serves on the boards of several nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Prior to joining PepsiCo, Dr. Tataranni was Senior Vice President, Head of Global Medical Affairs, focused on diabetes and cardiovascular business unit for mature markets at Sanofi, and had several other responsibilities with their group. And then between 1999 and 2004, he was the head of Obesity, Diabetes, and Energy Metabolism unit at Phoenix Epidemiology and Clinical Research Branch of the National Institutes of Health, and director of the Clinical Research Center at the same institution from 2000 to 2004. He is an avid researcher, has published and lectured extensively at both national and international forums, graduate of Catholic University School of Medicine in Rome, went on to receive a specialty diploma in endocrinology, metabolic diseases, and diabetes from the university, and has literally over 100 manuscripts published out there, in addition to contributing numerous research articles and book chapters. A lot of very exciting topics to get into today. Dr. Antonio Tataranni, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Hey, Ara. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm super glad to be here.
It's great having you. I would love to start off because, as I mentioned in the bio, you have for the last couple of decades sort of been integrally involved in this triad of obesity, of diabetes, of cardiometabolic. But in the publications, you've even gone beyond that. Over the last 20 years, you've published about the sort of the inflammatory connection to these disorders, the immune response, even the neurologic conditions associated with this set of syndromes. Talk about how you got started in it all, because clearly the themes you're working on 20 years ago quite pertinent to 2023.
Yeah, thank you for portraying it that way. It's always an interesting moment when you have to reflect on your own body of work, and as you said, try to determine whether is still relevant to what you do or what you're doing at the moment when you have that reflection, or society at large. Listen, I'll say it up front. I'm intellectually immensely curious, and I've probably done half, if not a third, of the things that, if I had all the time and all the resources in the world, I would have liked to do. And that intellectual curiosity, for the most part, has served me very, very, very well. I started my career. Imagine, I'm gonna disclose one of the secrets that very few people know. I started my career wanting to become a plastic surgeon, and see how far from it or not. my career takes. No, truth be told, I was fortunate enough in the formative years of my medical school, as you said, in Rome, to have a couple of very profound mentorship relationships that opened my mind to the importance of science in the sense of just opposing it to a career in clinical medicine. And quite frankly, the first node of my decision tree very early on in my career was, do I think I am a doctor that is good enough at solving the problem of nutrition and health one patient at a time? And or is there an alternative idea to that? And are there other ways to explore solving that equation and potentially helping larger numbers of individuals that any single physician will ever do. So that's really the reason why I was then eventually and progressively more and more interested in the aspects, in the public health aspects of the relationship between nutrition and health. That took me quite serendipitously, I have to say. We can explore that story if you want. To my first ever trip as a postdoctoral fellow in a US lab. That was the NIH lab in Phoenix, Arizona, that really defined my career as a clinical scientist. And there I was surrounded by more people that were even more enamored with the idea that science is the way to go. And I got to the NIH lab in Phoenix, Arizona at a crucial time in the history of the science of chronic metabolic diseases, because that was the very transition between thinking about obesity, diabetes, dyslipidemias as pathologies that were determined primarily by metabolic problems, the way you eat, the way you live your life, et cetera, but not with a lot of molecular mechanistic explanations behind it. Yeah. And I got there at the time where that exploded. And it was the time when the NIH had launched the Human Genome Project, and that was the promise of identifying the molecular unlocks of all the diseases, and especially of chronic metabolic diseases. So I was part of the KEEPS, was a multi-team, a multi-institution effort that designed the first GWAS, the global genomic study for the search of genes for obesity and type 2 diabetes. And we were fortunate to have the wonderful collaboration with the Pima Indians of Arizona, which unfortunately at the time had the world record, as you probably know or remember, of both obesity and type 2 diabetes. So it was an extremely exciting moment in science, in the discovery of leptin, if you remember.
Sure.
At that time. So it was incredibly energizing and intoxicating. And I got into the lab, like this is the story of all the entire generation of scientists from Europe like me that decided to explore the world of science in the US. We got there as fellows, then we worked our way through the ranks of each of these organizations, academics or governmental. And eventually I got to the point of running the entire clinical research lab at Phoenix. And in doing so, so part is my curiosity, as I told you before, but part is how the science was evolving and how the means of explaining what first initially was a pretty brutal approach of psychology and physiology, and maybe a little bit of pathophysiology, had opened up with molecular biology. So I went with gusto in multiple directions with the intention of re-explaining the pathophysiology of these chronic metabolic diseases with a more molecular approach to it. And but before you say it, research that I did with that team at NIH that really put us on the map had nothing to do with either physiology, pathophysiology, or even in molecular biology. At some point, we thought that if we were convinced that obesity, diabetes, and other chronic metabolic diseases had neurological or neuroanatomical constructs behind it, that we should go and look into the brain. And so opening up this program of neuroimaging of obesity and type 2 diabetes is ultimately, I have to say, my claim to fame as a scientist, as far as I was involved very personally in producing new knowledge.
Outstanding. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've had the honor to profile a lot of the thought leaders at Pepsi. One of them, Ellen de Brabander, who I've known for a couple of decades now, was sort of similar path as you in the sense
we actually intercepted for a few years at
right. There was that overlap, and
Sanofi,
yeah. And so you had the pharma experience. You move into food, we think about sort of these two industries, right? I mean, they're different in the sense, okay, well, one's creating these interesting bioactive substances for human diseases, the other for satiety, but nutrition and wellness. And nowadays in 2023, there's significant overlap. I mean, on one hand, we have medicinal foods created by the food industry. The pharma industry is playing around with substances like microbiome cocktails that look nothing like the drugs of old. A lot of cross-fertilization. Talk a little bit about that from your perspective in terms of sort of maybe some of the surprises as you sort of segued from pharma into food, and sort of the extent of the very unique science that goes on there at the intersection.
Yeah, no, you said it right. When what molecular biology has done to the field of nutrition is to democratize the place where you can follow targetable ideas. And now, once you find the active principle of the molecule that has an impact on a given molecular pathway, whether that molecule is natural, you can create an artificial version of that, then it becomes an issue of medicinal chemistry in the end. But very well, Ira, as probably many of your people that listen to this type of conversations, that a number of medicines that have been in the marketplace for a long time have their origin in terms of their active principle in nature, too long the list to be mentioned. Yep. So now I think the convergence or the overlap between the pharma industry, the dietary supplement industry, and the food and beverage industry is one that has been in the making for a long time. As far as I can tell, I've always seen these three fields as very interconnected, and to a certain extent always had the hope, the desire to explore all of them, which fortunately is happening in my career. And the reason why that is interesting is the following. Chronic metabolic diseases, as you know, Ira, and as I'm sure many of your viewers know, are extremely prevalent. Okay, so there is an enormous number of people that carry this disease burden. And that is unfortunately already in and of itself, because you wouldn't want so many people suffering from all of these things. But the real tragedy, the real drama is that ultimately in the progression of their disease, people with chronic metabolic diseases are the 20% of the population that consume 80 to 90% of healthcare resources. And therefore, they become, and I say that with the utmost respect, and hopefully I don't offend anybody, they become an almost insurmountable burden to healthcare systems around the world, Western world, and eventually that will happen in emerging markets as well. So why do I say all of this? Because many who have been in this field for as long as I have been, which is close to 40 years, eventually are humbled into the idea through all the experiences that we have done that yes, medicines are important because they will improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. But the denominator of what we're talking about here is in the billions.
Yeah.
And now, which brings us to the issue of how do you put a dent into the growing epidemiology of this chronic metabolic diseases, of which obesity, if you want, is the mother of them all.
Right.
And many of us, and including myself, have come to the conclusion that the solution cannot be a treatment down the road when the disease is well established and has done much of the damage already, but it has to be an approach to prevention. Now, this is easier said than done, because when you talk about prevention, it's, everybody comes to the table with good intentions, but then comes the question of who pays for prevention. And that it's easier asked than answered, and it's probably the question that it's easier to ask and the most difficult to answer. And many of us have convinced us that the part of the solution to that question is nutrition. Mm-hmm. Nutrition, not only in the sense of nutrition education of the consumer, of the public, importantly, nutrition education of the physicians that eventually have to make those recommendations, or the healthcare professional allied that they have to make those recommendations, but is nutrition at scale, because we gotta be careful with these constructs that we keep putting forward, where we say people have to eat healthy. Yeah, everybody understands that, but people will eat healthy only if they can afford healthiness, only if they can enjoy healthiness, mm-hmm. and only if they can access healthiness. So this is the famous construct of the 3 A's: accessibility, affordability, and acceptability. And if we don't attack the problem from that angle, we'll continue in the circular conversations that don't really bring forward a solution. And I passionately believe that the solution exists with people that produce food, so nutrition in that sense, and people that produce food at scale, so for the masses, not for the elites. And that is why today, among other reasons, I'm the chief medical officer of the largest second food and beverage company in the world.
Awesome. Really awesome. And yeah, and those 3 A's, I mean, I think, and I enjoyed another presentation or an interview that you gave for the Food of Medicine conference. I think it's, perfectly laid out again, and for everybody that's listening and watching the show, if you can go to the Pepsi Health and Nutrition Science site and see a lot of these peer-reviewed materials. But, I just, based on what you're talking about here, and I pulled down 3 of them the other day, one paper that had to do with polyphenol combinations in juice products, another about sort of the interaction between fibers and fecal microbiota, and then this other really cool one that you have. I've had high blood pressure since I was in my 20s, but the study of these interesting phytochemicals called avanthramides that are found in oats.
That's right.
I love what you're doing, because as I've said for myself in my own career, when I was in phytochemistry 20 years ago, the ability to create these combinatorial cocktails of bioactive substances, far beyond what any single drug could ever do. And I think just these 3, they struck me because they encompass sort of everything that we were just discussing that falls in sort of that metabolic, cardio combination syndrome. Talk about a little bit how you pick some of these concepts to run after, because I mean I just picked a small selection of the literature that's out there on what's going on at Pepsi Health and Nutrition. Say a few words about this. This is very important.
No, with pleasure. The only risk that I run, Ira, is to be a little bit repetitive, because for your frequent viewers, if you have interviewed already 20-30% of my team, so some of these concepts have been very well elaborated by the likes of James Carter and Tristan Brisbois. So your viewers might have already heard some of the things that
I want to hear them again.
but at the risk of being repetitive, I'll go over a few things. So we were having a moment ago a discussion about the overlap between different industries, and I guess the glue of that conversation is indeed this idea of functional ingredients, or functionality in food. So, and there is truly an opportunity. Some of it is very well known. For example, when you fortify foods, that means you provide nutrition, but you provide also micronutrients that might be deficient in the particular nutritive situation in which they are deployed. But beyond fortification, which is probably the best established portion of nutrition science as far as adding value to what we eat, there is an enormous emergence through some of the themes that we have already explored of the idea that some of the compounds that exist in nature have an effect on the physiology of humans, and can they be exploited for the better good of bringing to the marketplace products that have functional properties. And so my team has done a very systematic review of the space. We have an instrument which is called the R&D Innovation Dossier. We have written in the past couple of years, I believe, in the range of 10, 15 of these, where we have taken each of the functional spaces that might be relevant strategically to our company. Obviously, we are not a medical nutrition company, so we have to be careful how deep we go into these things. But I'll give you an example. Immunity, typical example, sleep, relaxation, stress management, energy management, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have taken these spaces and we have said, first of all, if you take it from a scientific point of view, when I say scientific, I mean functional capabilities that can be supported or have been supported by traditional human studies. So if we take each of the spaces, how many of these ingredients are really supported by strong science, and how many of them would translate in what we call claims, which is language that we put basically on the package, to inform the customer, consumer, that when you consume this particular snack or this particular beverage, you don't do it only for your own enjoyment, but you might gain some functionality through the ingredients that are added to the product. So we have done that. We have deployed a number of these products are currently in the marketplace. Some will continue to appear in the marketplace. And it's a trend that is growing, if you want, but it is a niche trend for a couple of reasons. And I have to be clear here, because a company like PepsiCo, with hundreds of products in its portfolio, who reaches the life of a billion and a half consumers every 24 hours, the shape of the portfolio is obviously one of bringing a number of offerings to the marketplace, but we have to pay attention eventually to what scale up to our industrial footprint. And so some are projects that exist for a short period of time. If they don't scale up, they disappear from our radar screens and appear on somebody else's radar screen. But that being said, we have a number of experiments ongoing to understand how functional ingredients enhance the experience of our consumers. And we will certainly continue to pursue the one that quote unquote stick in the marketplace. Why do I say all of this, Ira? Because I want to make one important point to share with you and with your audience. For us, coming from the high science of physiology, pathophysiology, molecular biology, drug development medicine, we are a little bit into our own little shell, because we are experts. And we think that people, the majority of people, approach food perhaps the way we would, with a scientific mind. But I have to say very happily that in this past 5 years working at PepsiCo, I've been humbled into understanding that consumer dynamics are somewhat very different from the way a scientist would think. People don't eat science, they eat food. And food has so many connotations that now we would stretch in too many probably non-relevant directions. But I know now, as a scientist of the food and beverage company, that if I want to convince a consumer of a given benefit of what we bring to the marketplace, I have to do it through the lens of taste, price, and convenience. Yep. So I can have the most brilliant idea as a scientist in terms of to add functionality to a given product. But if that product don't taste well, a few people will try it. And a few people will even enjoy it because people have this idea that things that are good for your health should taste not so good. But the reality is, if you want to deploy the solution at scale, you have to go through the lens of how a consumer makes the choice at the rack in the grocery store. And that is a big challenge for me and my team, because obviously we are very passionate about the science of functional ingredients, but then there is the reality of landing those ideas in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in addition to you thinking about affordability and accessibility and acceptability, you have to take that hat off and put your other hat on as well. You were quoted, there was this recent article, demand for chief medical officer roles skyrocketing during the pandemic, talking about how you are, in addition to all these life science responsibilities, you are the inaugural chief medical officer of the organization. You got 260,000 plus employees, associates to think about, physical health, physical resilience, mental resilience. Talk about the last couple of years, especially, and how this has sort of impacted, your 24 hours a day that you think about Pepsi, you have all these other things you got to think about as well.
Listen, no, thank you, because that is an important responsibility within the company, which I take very seriously. But I will say one thing immediately, and that is I don't do it alone. That would be impossible. The role of the chief medical officer sits next to a number of other departments inside the company that take very, very good care of our employees, the HR teams, the total rewards team, the health and human services. There is there is really a large number of resources that are deployed in organizations like PepsiCo, but all large organizations, to make sure that we do the best to the people that make the success of the company, which is all of us, our employees. Now, having said that, that was, first of all, the biggest honor of my career, perhaps at the worst time, given that it collided with the peak of the COVID pandemic, but so be it. I was extremely glad to be ready in stepping into that role at a time where the company really needed that type of support. And I was, you have to think about how life is a number of coincidences, if you want, but what I am extremely proud, besides having been nominated inaugural chief medical officer of the company, is to have a leadership that had the vision and the intuition to say, at this moment in time, although admittedly there were discussions before the pandemic, but to say, this is the moment that crystallizes that decision. And let's ask Antonio, with the support of our internal expert and perhaps as a bridge to external experts, to help the leadership shuttle the company through the pandemic, which, with all the suffering that we had to contribute, like all other organizations, we have had our share of people during the pandemic that got sick. Unfortunately, our share of colleagues that lost their life during the pandemics. But I think doing what we did, which was to humble ourselves into saying one more time, let's follow the science and let's not follow the politics of what's going to happen here. I think we have limited, I know, because we have looked at the numbers repeatedly, we have limited to the maximum that suffering. And hopefully by putting a face to a crisis like that one, we have humanized a little bit the experience of going through that horrifying moment of time for our employees. And I have to say, Ira, when I go around and I travel wearing one of my 3 hats in the company, whatever was the hardship of the moment, it all goes away when people that, we are 260,000 in the company. I know a lot of people by this time, but I don't know everybody. And there is still that moment where somebody who I don't know approaches me and comes and says, look, I would like to thank you very personally for what was done during the pandemic, because without having that friendly face that was speaking to us from the top of the company, would have been much more complicated. So that's very important. It's a bit of a rounding of the circle of my career. Who would have predicted from plastic surgeon to being the chief medical officer of a food and beverage company? But so be it. I mean, I have been blessed with this career. And obviously, before you ask me the question, there is perhaps a pre-pandemic, a pandemic, and then there is a post-pandemic discussion on what the role of a chief medical officer is in large organizations that deliver healthcare to large swaths of the population, but they're not hospitals, they're not care clinics, they're not traditional place of deliverance of healthcare. And here is where another opportunity is emerging, both internally with a number of things that we are doing to evolve the role from the fatherly figure during the pandemic to something a little bit more dynamic and more oriented towards mental and physical well-being. Right. But also a number of us, chief medical officers, where that role was the birthed during the pandemic, are holding hands and are creating networks now where we continue to advance this thinking in terms of what is the opportunity here, what can we do that couldn't have been done if this role did not exist. And if you want, we can explore a few of those initiatives that are popping up a little bit everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that'd be interesting because I had Dr. Steve Eiley on from Land Rover, and he was talking about a similar concept in the sense, hey, we're here now, Chief Medical Officer. We have more than the sort of this very narrow role that you schedule. Talk a little bit about the CMO Network concept, if you would, because I think that's
so. So this is if you want, it's a conversation on the evolution of the role post-pandemic.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'll give you also a couple of examples of
Please.
the lanes that we are developing within PepsiCo.
Yes.
And some of coming off the pandemic, evidently there was an enormous fatigue, both physical and mental.
Right.
But mental fatigue was, and perhaps to my modest opinion, continues to be one of the key issues of trying to find the new norm into this post-pandemic world. So we have taken that in PepsiCo, and we have explored with my colleagues in HR, especially the group led by Duncan Mikalev, where we really have been brainstorming a lot, and we have come up with this idea that mental health is too general a concept, and so we should identify something that it's more quote unquote trainable. And we have landed on this concept of resilience. Yep. Around with mental resilience, around which we have built a wonderful program. We are smack in the middle of it. We've just completed cohort 2 within the company with 5,000 people signed up for the entire training program, built on an interesting framework of managing stress, focus, empathy, burnout, and building purpose and positivity. The other thing, so mental, physical, we have, we are a company that makes, moves, and sells a lot of little packages, if you want.
Yeah.
And throughout the pandemic, we have had this wonderful army of frontline colleagues that didn't have the privilege of deciding whether they should stay at home or should go to work. So they have continued to work throughout the pandemic. And so we are more and more committed to think of ways to make their contribution to the success of the company more enjoyable, if you want. And we have landed on this interesting concept of these are our corporate athletes. And from talking to James and others that
Yep.
GSSI is under the responsibility of life sciences, and so very close to the Chief Medical Officer office. And so we said, we give advice on how to be good athletes to everybody else around the world. Why don't we turn the table around? And we have designed a beautiful little program, which is now in pilot stage, where we have turned the table and we said, let's go talk to our corporate athletes and let's help them with hydration, heat stress management, and all those kind of things. And so we have a wonderful program going in that direction. And then a little bit off the field, but still very important, we have our PepsiCo Foundation that is very involved in combating hunger throughout the world. I've found myself more and more involved with C.D. Glynn and the foundation to look after the specific arm of what we do that has to do with malnutrition in kids.
Yep.
And so we have 2 fantastic programs now running, one in Latin America and one we just launched a week and a half ago, 2 weeks in India, which is also very much aligned with the philosophy of having a chief medical officer. So those are some of the examples of what a chief medical officer does in a food and beverage company post-pandemic. And now to the external world, it's true there are a number of initiatives that are emerging to discuss this opportunities, this possibility, all under the general banner that think for a second about it, Ira. You put 10, 15, 17, 20 chief medical officers of the largest corporations around the table. Those corporations, it's a bad word, but they do control the lives of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people. Mm-hmm. And if these chief medical officers can add a little bit of clinical thinking to the delivery of health and well-being to those swaths of the population, this could be perhaps a novel, untapped opportunity to do a lot of good on health. So, make a long story short, myself, Henry Ting at Delta Airlines, and Mark Watkins at Kroger Health. We have founded this group of 10, 15 companies that meet on a regular basis. We have met predominantly virtually for the past year. It's called the US CMO Roundtable, CMO Roundtable. And we have our most visible contribution so far is a paper that has been cited quite extensively, where we have tried to define and identify the archetypes of these emerging roles of chief medical officer across unusual companies, unusual for having a chief medical officer. Right. And just I came back Friday from Europe, Geneva, where the WHO now is seeing the opportunity of federating the ideas of chief medical officer, chief health officers, and they have stood up a community under the World Economic Forum banner that has just met in person for a couple of days at their headquarters. A lot of great ideas we will have to formalize, and there will be appropriate publicity of that when that is ready. A plan of action, which is a roadmap to utilize this opportunity to improve delivery of care within large corporations.
Outstanding, really outstanding. And so I know we're coming up against a hard stop, but I just wanted to ask quickly about PEP positive, because I know this is another sort of fundamental transformation piece of the company that you're involved in. A piece of that is sort of this positive choices bit that we've talked about, but there's the agricultural, the value chain. We forget that Pepsi, has several million acres of stuff they farm to create these products for us. Say just that while we have you, a couple words about this.
Yeah, no, that is our end-to-end strategic initiative that drives everything we do at this point. And it's really at the core of why PepsiCo is such a great company, and it attracts the professional figures like mine. Why would somebody with such a strong background in science want to join a company that at the surface sells potato chips and soda pops? It's because that is a misperception of what this great company is all about. This is a company that wants to win in the marketplace, for sure, because we are a for-profit organization, but with a purpose. And the purpose is expressed, is articulated now in this wonderful strategic play, which is called PepsiCo Positive. As you said, there is positive agriculture, there is positive supply chain, and then there is positive choices, which is where me and my team come more into the picture. Positive for the planet. So all the environmental efforts that the company is very publicly undertaking against very definitive objectives, and positive choices for people. And I'll give it to you in two broad strokes, and that this might be a good topic for a future episode with me, but more importantly with the people in the sustainability office that are much closer to these things. In positive choices, we're doing two things. We are continuing a decade-long effort to make our portfolio of choices more permissible, which meaning we are eliminating at the fastest pace we can nutrients to limits. So less sugar, less salt, and less bad fats. That is a journey that we're doing in the public domain with publicly stated goals. People monitor us to see our progress, and whenever we can, we try to accelerate it. I'll say it again, this might be a little bit counterintuitive for people. We had the discussion on functional ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
At scale, making our portfolio more permissive is probably, in my opinion, is certainly the most important contribution that we can do to health system, because those changes happen not to boutique products that exist in the marketplace only in small segments of the market, but they happen to products that are sold by the company at scale.
Yep.
So even small changes, and they're not small, I don't mean they are small, but even small changes to those big brands are likely to have the impact on public health that we were discussing before. So that's one effort, and our team is incredibly involved in finding the appropriate technical solutions to continue that journey in collaboration with platforms and categories within the company, product developers. And then we are developing progressively this idea, okay, that's eliminating things. What if we can add in our portfolio platforms, things that are good for your nutrition? And here is alternative substrates such as chickpeas here in the West, plantains down in Latin America, millets in Southeast Asia, rice in the Far East Asia. And so there is a whole massive plan, if you want, that we are undertaking to make our portfolio better that way. And it's something that is, again, at the end of this very complicated journey, if I had dreamt of being able to touch the lives of so many people by doing the things that I just described that this company is doing, I would have not been even able to dream it. So that's what makes me extremely, extremely proud to be a member of the PepsiCo family, but on top of that, to be the chief medical officer of such a company. And hopefully that pride and that passion is transmitted to your viewers.
It most definitely is. And I see a couple future episodes here, because I could talk to you for hours about these themes and many others. But I just, I really wishing you the best with all of it, Antonio, as you continue on this journey, because it is quite fascinating, and best of luck as you continue to develop all these initiatives for the company. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Dr. Antonio Tataranni, Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President of Life Sciences at PepsiCo. Antonio, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us and educate us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing for billions of people out there. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via what you've been doing along your journey. Really great story.
Thank you for having me, Ira.
Great having you.